Red Mesa always seemed to hold its breath at dusk, when the sun stretched blood orange across the desert and the wind carried more dust than air. The little frontier town lay curled between redstone cliffs and endless scrublands, its buildings battered by sand, its streets hollowed by fear. Lately, the townsfolk walked with eyes low and doors bolted early, whispering the name of the gang that had turned their peaceful days into dread, ravagers. Men who rode with no mercy and laughed while others begged. Their shadow had been growing for weeks, moving through canyons and creek beds like wolves circling a campfire, and now the fire was burning low. Sheriff Daniel Rourke knew their signs better than anyone. He'd spent every sunrise riding the edges of Red Mesa's land, scanning for hoofprints, ashes of campfires, and the strange symbols the gang carved into dead trees as warnings. Daniel was young for a lawman, barely in his late 20s, but his badge shone brighter than most men's carriage. Folks admired him for standing tall even when his voice shook, admired him because he believed in justice the way some people believe in prayer. But on this day, Daniel rode with a weight in his chest he could not ignore. Word had come from a passing trader that the ravagers were gathering near Salt Ridge Canyon. Daniel didn't wait to summon a posse. He couldn't bear the thought of sending untrained townspeople to their deaths. He saddled his bay horse and rode alone, dust rising behind him like a trail of smoke. The canyon was quiet, too quiet. Shadows stretched long across the rocks, and the golden light dimmed as if the sky itself grew afraid. Daniel slowed his horse and listened. A drip of water, a distant cry of a hawk, and then the soft scrape of boots against stone. He barely had time to reach for his revolver before rifles cracked from above him. Bullets exploded against the ground, slicing through the air like angry hornets. His horse reared, screaming, and Daniel leapt off, rolling behind a cluster of sagebrush. His heart pounded so hard he could taste iron on his tongue. The ravagers had been waiting for him. They knew he would come. A mocking voice echoed from the canyon rim. "Should have stayed in town, Sheriff. A hero ain't nothing but a fool who ain't learned fear yet." Daniel recognized the voice. Cole Maddox, the Ravager's second-in-command. Cruel, sharp-eyed, and eager to spill blood. Daniel steadied his weapon, breath ragged, hands dusty. "I'm here for justice, Cole," Daniel shouted, lifting himself to one knee. "You won't terrorize Red Mesa anymore." Laughter erupted around him. 4, maybe 5 men. They had the high ground. They had numbers. They had already planned how he would die. "Justice," Cole sneered. "Boy, the West don't care about justice. Only who shoots first." The next volley of bullets tore through the brush. One struck Daniel's shoulder, spinning him backward. Pain burned like fire through his arm. He forced himself to crawl to a boulder, using its shade as cover, clutching the wound to stop the bleeding. His breath came in short, painful bursts, and his vision flickered at the edges. He returned fire when he could, but his shots were desperate, scattered. He could feel the canyon closing in. He could feel the end. A third round struck his side, knocking the strength from his legs. The world tilted, and Daniel fell onto his back, staring up at the dusk sky as the light faded into deep violet. The air smelled of gunpowder and warm dust. Above him, the Ravager's silhouettes moved like shadows made of cruelty. Daniel tried to lift his gun again, but his fingers no longer obeyed him. He knew he couldn't win this fight. He knew the town he had sworn to protect would fall into terror the moment his heart stopped beating. And for the first time in years, he felt fear. Not fear for himself, fear that he had failed. His thoughts drifted to his father, Elias Rourke, the man whose legend hung over him like a long shadow. People used to tell Daniel stories about Elias, stories of impossible bravery, of men brought to justice miles from where they had committed their crimes, of a lawman so relentless evil itself whispered his name. But those were old tales, and Elias had been gone for so long that some claimed he had died out in the wastelands. Daniel had spent his life trying to live up to that legend. Now, lying broken on red earth, he felt he never had. The Ravagers approached him cautiously, guns trained on his unmoving body. Cole walked closest, boots scuffing the dirt, a cruel grin spreading across his face. "Should have known better, Sheriff," he said, nudging Daniel's revolver away with his boot. A town guarded by a boy was bound to fall. Daniel's lips parted, a weak breath escaping. Red Mesa deserved more. Cole leaned down, smirking. "Don't worry. We'll take good care of it." A final shot rang out, a cold, final punctuation in the gathering night. The sound echoed through the canyon, bouncing off stone walls until even the wind seemed to absorb its sorrow. When the Ravagers rode back into Red Mesa, Their horses thundered through the streets as if they already owned them. Businesses shut their doors. Lamps were extinguished. The preacher held trembling hands over his heart as the gang dismounted and tossed Daniel's badge into the dirt for the townsfolk to see. "Your lawman's dead," Cole announced. "The West belongs to us now." Women pulled their children closer. Men stood frozen, rage trembling beneath fear but unable to rise against armed killers. Red Mesa fell silent, every window shuttered, every voice drowned beneath the weight of despair. The next morning, Daniel Rourke was buried on the edge of town beside the old juniper trees that bent with the wind. Only a handful of townspeople dared attend. His grave was marked with a small wooden cross and a folded coat laid across the mound of earth, a symbol of a lawman whose courage had been greater than his years. Red Mesa became quieter in the days that followed. Outlaws roamed the main road freely. Nights echoed with drunken threats, the clatter of overturned chairs, and the angry shouts of men who believed the land was theirs to carve up as they pleased. But fear wasn't the only thing moving across the desert. On the seventh day, a trader riding south reported seeing a lone rider far out in the wasteland. An old man on a black horse, moving steadily toward Red Mesa. His coat was tattered, his hat pulled low, and his silhouette cut through the shimmering heat like a blade through cloth. The trader had felt something he couldn't explain. A chill, a heaviness in the air, the kind that comes before lightning splits the sky. He told the townsfolk, whoever that man was, he rode like a storm coming. No one dared hope. No one spoke the name they wished it could be. Legends were for campfire tales, not for a town broken by grief. But out beyond the ridge, beneath the fading sun, the lone rider kept coming. His pace was slow, steady, and filled with purpose, as if he carried the weight of a promise made long ago. And in the hush between desert winds, Red Mesa unknowingly waited for the return of a man who would change not just their fate, but the fate of the West itself. The old rider reached Red Mesa just as the sky dimmed into the violet hush of evening, a color that reminded him painfully of the bruised years he had spent wandering the frontier. Elias Rourke dismounted with a stiffness that came from age, from battles long past, and from a heart still carrying ghosts. His boots touched the ground like he was stepping onto sacred soil. He had not returned to this land in more than a decade, not since he had walked away from law and family for reasons only he understood, reasons he had convinced himself were righteous at the time. But now, with silence falling heavily over the town, he felt something deep in his bones shift. Something was wrong. Red Mesa did not greet him with the usual clatter of wagons or distant laughter from saloons. Instead, every doorway was shut, every window shuttered. The wind carried only dust and the faint echo of fear. Elias stood in the empty street, adjusting the faded brim of his hat, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows. He had once read danger as easily as scripture, and danger was everywhere here. He led his horse toward the ridge, following a narrow path a local child had pointed out before scrambling away from him as if spooked by a ghost. The path curved along the hillside until a small graveyard came into view. Elias stopped walking. A fresh mound of earth set beneath a crooked wooden cross. A coat, folded with the kind of care only grieving hands could give, rested against the grave. Elias approached slowly, as though drawn by an invisible force. His boots sank into the soft dirt as he lowered himself onto one knee to trace the carved letters with his weathered fingers. Daniel Rourke, Sheriff of Red Mesa. A good man, a brave soul. Elias's breath caught in his throat. His vision blurred, though he didn't know whether it was from dusk or tears fighting to surface. He lowered his head, letting silence speak the words he could not force past the heaviness in his chest. His boy was dead. The son he had left behind in an attempt to protect him from the violent legacy that trailed Elias like a curse. If only he'd stayed. If only he'd been here to teach Daniel more, or shield him, or simply ride beside him. But Elias had spent too many years believing distance would prevent his son from inheriting the bloody path he'd carved across the frontier. Now that distance had cost Daniel his life. He remained at the graveside for a long time, until the stars blinked awake above him. When he finally stood, his hands trembled on the reins. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Forgive me, son." The next morning, he walked the town with a quiet, deliberate stride. Red Mesa shrank beneath his gaze, houses worn down, spirits broken, and families retreating at the mere sound of approaching hooves. A storekeeper finally stepped forward, lowering his voice to a whisper. "You're Elias, aren't you? Daniel's father." Elias nodded. The man swallowed hard. "They killed him. The Ravagers. They're bleeding this town dry, and his voice faltered, We got no fight left. Elias listened without a word. Then he asked, "Where can I find Clara Boone?" The storekeeper gestured toward a ranch house at the edge of town. She was the last to see Daniel alive. She tried to reach him, but she couldn't get there in time. Elias rode toward the Boone ranch, passing empty corrals and wind-battered fences. When he arrived, Clara Boone stepped onto her porch, gripping a shotgun though her eyes carried no malice. She was a quiet woman, one whose strength came not from loudness but from surviving more storms than she ever asked for. Soot-black hair framed her sunburned face, and grief lingered around her like a trailing shawl. "Marshal Rourke," she said softly, as though saying his name reopened her wounds. "I thought you were dead." "Sometimes I thought so too," Elias replied. Clara lowered the shotgun and motioned him to sit. The porch boards creaked beneath them. The silence stretched until she finally spoke. Daniel rode out alone. He didn't want anyone else dying. He wouldn't wait for help. He thought he could reason with them, or at least keep the fight away from town. A tremor moved through her voice. "I found him after the ambush. He was still breathing. Barely." She swallowed hard, tightening her hands around her knees. "He told me to tell you something. He said he wished he had inherited your courage, that he hoped he hadn't failed you." Elias's breath left him in a painful rush. Clara looked at him, eyes shining. "But he didn't fail. He fought for us. Until the very end." Elias turned away, jaw clenched as he stared out across the ranch yard. Regret coiled inside him like a rattlesnake ready to strike. "I should have been here," he muttered. "If I'd stayed, Daniel." "No," Clara said firmly. "Elias, you weren't the reason he died. The Ravagers were. Cole Maddox and his devils. They're planning something bigger. Taking Red Mesa was just the beginning." Elias's eyes sharpened. "How big?" Clara hesitated before answering, as though speaking the truth aloud gave it too much power. "They want control of the whole frontier. Every trade route, every town from here to Silver Bend. They're gathering men, supplies, guns. They know no one can stop them." Elias leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "Someone will." Clara studied him carefully, sensing something heavy, something buried, awakening behind his gaze. "You were more than just a marshal, weren't you?" she asked. His silence answered for him. During his younger years, Elias Rourke hadn't merely worn a badge. He had ridden with a secret federal pursuit unit tasked with hunting the worst killers to ever walk the West. A group known only in whispers as the Black Trail Wardens, men who followed death like hounds, who tracked monsters others feared to name. Elias had been one of their best trackers, a relentless force who left more outlaw camps in ashes than intact. When the unit disbanded, the survivors scattered, most vanishing into their own shadows. Elias had hoped burying that part of himself would keep Daniel safe from becoming anything like him. But the past never stayed buried. Clara watched the recognition dawn in his eyes, the return of something sharper than grief. "You're thinking of fighting them," she whispered. "I'm thinking of finishing what my son started," Elias replied. Clara nodded slowly. "Then you should know one more thing." She stood and crossed the porch, retrieving a leather pouch. Inside was a torn map marked with symbols and route lines, Ravager plans stolen from one of their camps. "They're moving fast," she said. "And if they succeed, there won't be a soul left in the frontier who can stop them." Elias took the map, his jaw tightening as he studied the inked warnings. A wind kicked up, carrying the faint cry of a hawk overhead. The sound felt like an omen. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. Clara hesitated. "I've been watching them, tracking what I could. Someone had to do something, and Daniel trusted me." Elias regarded her with new respect. Clara Boone wasn't just a rancher with trembling hands. She carried courage that ran deep, maybe as deep as his own. She reminded him of the scouts he once rode with, people who lived between shadows, always listening to the land. He folded the map carefully. "You did right. Daniel would have been proud." Emotion flickered across Clara's face, but she steadied herself. "What are you going to do now?" Elias placed his hat back on his head, his silhouette sharpening as the sun dipped lower behind him. "I'm going to remind the Ravagers why some men shouldn't be hunted," he said quietly, "and why evil shouldn't celebrate too soon." Clara stepped closer. "Elias, this won't be like your old fights. They're not scared of lawmen." "No," he replied, "but they remember the Black Trail Wardens." Night settled over the frontier like a heavy blanket, muffling sound and sharpening instinct. Elias Rourke crouched beside a mesquite tree at the edge of Salt Ridge, eyes narrowed against the flicker of distant firelight from the Ravagers' camp. He moved with an ease that belied his age, slow when he needed silence, swift when shadows offered cover. Clara Boone knelt beside him, her breath steady though her hands trembled faintly. She had insisted on coming. Elias hadn't expected her to have the steel for this kind of work, but she surprised him at every turn. "You sure these traps will hold?" she whispered. "They're not meant to hold," Elias murmured, tightening a loop of iron wire and anchoring it to a rock. "They're meant to startle and slow. Fear is a better weapon than chains." Clara watched him work, noticing how he laid the wire with the precision of a surgeon, how he studied every footprint and broken twig before moving on. This wasn't the work of a simple lawman. This was the art of someone who had hunted monsters across thousands of miles. Elias raised his hand, signaling silence. They both froze as distant laughter echoed from the camp. The Ravagers were drinking again, boasting, jeering, confident that Red Mesa lay helpless beneath them. But confidence breeds carelessness, and Elias Rourke had always hunted carelessness first. He motioned for Clara to stay low, and the two crept along the ridge, placing traps in narrow choke points where riders would pass. Wire snares, hidden pits, sharpened stakes, crude tools but deadly when paired with a sharp mind. Clara gathered stones, blocking trails to funnel the outlaws exactly where Elias wanted them. She moved with a quiet certainty, the fire in her eyes revealing a woman who had seen enough suffering to never tolerate it again. "You learned all this tracking from ranch life?" Elias asked quietly as they worked. "Part of it," she replied. "Part from my father. He wasn't just a rancher. He scouted for the army. Showed me how to read wind, how to move with the land, and how to survive men worse than wolves." Elias gave a rare, approving nod. Daniel trusted the right person. At the mention of Daniel, Clara's expression softened, grief flickering but steadying into resolve. He believed the West was worth saving. Elias tightened the final knot on a tripline. "Then we're going to finish what he started." When the moon dipped behind a cloud, the night turned darker, and the hunt began. The first Ravager fell before he realized he was in danger. Riding along the ridge, he leaned forward in his saddle just as the snare yanked him sideways. His scream ended abruptly as his head struck a boulder. Two more riders galloped toward him, shouting his name. They didn't see Elias hiding behind a cluster of brush, rifle poised and steady as an iron oath. He squeezed the trigger once. The echo faded before the second outlaw toppled backward. The third fled into the night, panic in every frantic hoofbeat. Clara watched Elias's silhouette, the rifle braced against his shoulder, the long barrel glinting faintly in starlight. It wasn't an ordinary rifle. It carried engravings, symbols worn down by years of use. It was a warden rifle, crafted for men who hunted killers across uncharted wilderness. Elias lowered it slowly, breath calm. 3 less devils in the world. The Ravager camp erupted minutes later, shouting, gunfire, torches flaring to life. Men ran in all directions, searching for attackers they could not see. Elias and Clara moved like shadows. They cut saddle straps, emptied water barrels, and scattered horses deep into the desert. Elias set a tiny oil charge beneath the gang's ammunition wagon. Clara lit a fuse with shaking hands, and the two slipped behind a boulder just as the explosion cracked open the night, scattering splinters and panic through the camp. Men screamed. Horses bucked. Fire spread along the ground. "Who's out there?" one outlaw shouted, firing blindly into the darkness. "Show yourself." But Elias never showed himself in the dark. The dark was his ally. Hours passed in chaos. By dawn, the Ravagers had lost more men, more supplies, and most importantly, control. Fear crawled through their ranks like a sickness. They whispered around the campfire that a ghost walked the desert, a Minu shot by moonlight and vanished into dust. Cole Maddox snarled at his followers, slamming his fist against a post. "Get a grip, all of you. One old man ain't taking us down." But even as he shouted, uncertainty crept into his eyes. Somewhere deep inside, Cole realized the pattern. Quiet kills, perfect shots, traps hidden with expert precision. This was no frightened townsman. This was someone who understood violence intimately. Someone who hunted for a living. By the next night, half the gang refused to venture out alone. Some wouldn't leave their tents at all. Every snapping twig sent their hands flying to pistol holsters. Every gust of wind felt like footsteps. On the third night, Elias struck harder. A pair of ravagers patrolled the canyon edge when a faint whistle cut through the air. One of them spun around too late. A bullet hit him in the throat. His partner fled, crying out for help, only to trip over a hidden line Clara had said hours earlier. He tumbled into the pit, the sound of bone cracking echoing across the canyon. Clara and Elias watched from the shadows, silent as stone. She swallowed, looking up at him. "They're terrified," she whispered. "They should be," Elias replied. For the first time in days, Clara saw something shift in his eyes, a spark that wasn't vengeance but purpose. Daniel's purpose. "Elias, why are you really doing this?" she asked quietly. "This isn't just revenge for Daniel, is it?" Elias leaned his rifle against a rock and exhaled slowly. "I'm doing this because Daniel believed in a West worth fighting for. Because he tried to protect it, even when others wouldn't stand beside him." His voice cracked at the edges, revealing pain deeper than bullets or scars. "And because I let the world turn dark while I hid from it." He looked down at his hands, hands that had ended countless lives in the name of justice. "I'm not here to avenge a death," he said softly. "I'm here to restore what Daniel died trying to protect." Clara nodded, her throat tight. In the dim starlight, Elias looked less like an avenging specter and more like a weary guardian, someone who had carried too much alone for too long. They rode back toward Red Mesa before sunrise. As they reached the outskirts of town, the first light spilled over the hills, painting the sky in gold and amber. The townspeople were just beginning to step outside when they saw him. Elias Rourke walked into Red Mesa with calm purpose, his long coat trailing dust, his rifle strapped to his back like a relic of another world. Men whispered. Women stepped back, clutching their children. A single outlaw loitering near the saloon stiffened, his cigar falling from his lips as his eyes widened in recognition. This wasn't a man returning to mourn. This was a force returning to reclaim. Cole Maddox emerged from the saloon, confusion flickering across his face when he realized who stood before him. Elias didn't reach for his weapon. He didn't need to. "I hear you boys been making a mess," Elias said, voice steady, almost quiet, but it carried across the entire street. Cole sneered. "Old men, you should have stayed buried." Elias's eyes hardened. "I buried my son. I won't bury another town." Cole's men hovered behind him, shifting uneasily. They didn't understand why, but something in Elias's presence cut through them like a cold wind. The air around him felt charged, the way the sky feels before lightning strikes. Elias stepped forward, boots crunching in the dust. The dawn light framed him like a rising legend returned from the grave. Red Canyon waited under a bruised sunrise, the sheer cliffs warming from black to red as dawn slid across the sky. The ravagers filled the basin below like a swarm preparing to spill across the frontier. Horses saddled, rifles loaded, their banners of crude leather flapping in the wind. Cole Maddox stood at the center of it all, pacing with the restless hunger of a predator ready to sink his teeth into the whole West. He believed this day belonged to him. He believed Red Mesa would kneel, Silver Bend would fall next, and the frontier would finally lie under his boot. He did not know that another sunrise had claimed this day long before he ever rode into the canyon. Elias Rourke approached from the east, riding a black stallion that moved through dust like smoke. He rode without hesitation, without disguise, without fear. His silhouette cut through the warming light as if carved by the hand of the desert itself. Behind him, the wind gathered his long coat, lifting it like wings ready to unfold. There was no posse with him. No backup. No promise of survival. Just a father carrying the memory of a fallen son, and the kind of resolve that does not break. When the ravagers spotted him, a ripple of uncertainty moved through their ranks. Their shouts echoed up the canyon walls. "That's him. The ghost from the ridge, alive. Shoot him down." But Cole raised a hand, clicking his tongue in amusement. "Let him come. I want to see the old wolf up close." Elias stopped at the canyon's mouth, dust swirling around his horse's hooves. His voice carried through the canyon as steady as the rising sun. "This ends today, Cole." Cole barked a laugh. "You rode in alone. You really think you can stop an army?" "I'm not here to stop an army," Elias replied. "I'm here to finish justice." Cole's smirk faltered, just for a heartbeat. Something about Elias's stillness unsettled him, as if the ground beneath him had begun to shift. But neither man noticed the quiet figure scaling the canyon wall to the west. Clara Boone moved with the grace of someone born between mountains and sky. Her boots found footholds invisible to most eyes. Her breath was controlled, rhythmic, as she slipped behind a row of boulders overlooking the camp. She carried a long hunting rifle, its barrel wrapped in cloth, its stock worn from years of use. In her veins flowed the skill of a mountain scout, her father's legacy, hidden until now. She had not told Elias everything. She had not told him the scars she earned tracking men who hunted her father long ago. But this was not the moment for confessions. This was the moment for debt, for love, for a promise to Daniel that the West he died protecting would never again bow to cruelty. Below her, the Ravagers fanned out, forming a jagged semicircle around Elias. Guns glinted in the dawn light. The canyon buzzed with violent anticipation. Elias dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the crackled earth. His hand hovered near the grip of his revolver, not in fear, but in patience. He breathed once, deeply, remembering Daniel's laughter, his stubbornness, his belief that the frontier could still be shaped into something good. This fight was for Daniel. This fight was for the towns that had lost hope. This fight was for every soul who had ever felt too small to stand against evil. Cole flicked his wrist. Kill him. The canyon erupted. Gunfire cracked like lightning. Bullets chewed into the ground where Elias had been standing seconds earlier. He moved with a speed the Ravagers had not expected, sidestepping, rolling, firing with deadly precision. Each shot was deliberate, each recoil absorbed into muscle memory forged through decades of hunts. One outlaw fell with a startled gasp. Another dropped his rifle before collapsing. Horses reared in panic. Clara took her first shot from above. Her bullet struck a Ravager aiming for Elias's back. The men spun and crumpled beside the fire pit. The others whirled toward the cliffs, shouting and firing blindly. She shifted position without hesitation, loading another round as she slid across sandstone worn smooth by centuries of wind. Her second shot cracked open the canyon again, dropping another outlaw before he could reach higher ground. Below, Elias advanced steadily, weaving through the chaos with the grim grace of a man who knew death intimately and refused to fear it. His revolver barked again and again, each shot finding a target. Cole's confidence began to wither. He watched his men fall, watched Elias carve through them with the cold efficiency of a legend reborn. "That's impossible," Cole whispered, trembling despite himself. "He's one man." A shadow moved behind him. Elias stepped through the smoke, coat torn, blood on his sleeve but purpose burning in every line of his face. "Your reign ends here, Cole." Cole drew his pistol, firing in desperation. Elias twisted aside, the bullet grazing his shoulder. Pain shot through him like fire, but he kept moving, driving forward with the determination of a father reclaiming the world his son died defending. Clara fired again, her bullet shattering the rock beside Cole's boot, forcing him to stumble. Elias seized the opening. He lunged, grabbing Cole's arm and wrenching the pistol away. The two men collided, falling to the dust. Cole clawed at him, wild with fury, snarling like an animal cornered. "You think you can bring back your boy by killing me?" Cole spat. Elias pinned him with a strength that belied his years. "No," he said, "but I can make sure no one else buries theirs because of you." Cole's eyes widened moments before Elias's fist struck. The outlaw collapsed, breath rattling, fight gone. Elias stood over him, chest heaving but eyes clear. Across the canyon, the remaining Ravagers threw down their weapons, scrambling to flee. Clara descended the cliff with swift steps, joining Elias as the dust settled into silence. "It's done," she said softly. Elias looked toward the horizon where the sun finally crowned the cliffs. "Not done," he replied. "Just beginning." Together they returned to Red Mesa, leading the wounded and captured gang members bound behind them. Townspeople gathered cautiously, unsure whether to trust hope after so much fear. But when they saw Cole Maddox in chains and Elias Rourke standing tall beside Clara, something broke free inside them. Relief, gratitude, belief. Elias faced the crowd, voice steady but carrying a tenderness he rarely allowed himself to show. "Evil wins only when good men stay silent," he said. "My son gave his life believing this land could still be saved. I intend to honor that." Silence rippled outward before transforming into something warm and bright, faith returning. Clara touched his arm gently, grounding him, reminding him he didn't have to carry everything alone. The sun rose higher, washing Red Mesa in light as though the land itself exhaled for the first time in months. And when night finally came and the fires burned low, a quiet voice, perhaps the wind, perhaps a storyteller, carried the truth that would outlive them all. The sheriff died thinking the West had fallen, but his father rode in and proved that some men carry justice in their very blood.